Let's be honest here. In the end, a tech shooter like Valorant often comes down to gunfights. And if you're feeling like you're losing the majority of your duels and you're constantly wondering why it feels like you're always going into fights at a disadvantage, while the enemy jet confidently peeks and headshots you right away, then this is the video you've been looking for. Hey guys, what's going on? It is Cruzavi here, and today I'm going to give you 3 key tips on how to win more gunfights in Valorant. Being ready to take fights, the SVS Dynamic and what it means for fighting in Valorant, and finally how to make yourself a much harder target for your opponents. So let's get started. Tip number 1 is about crosshair placement and mental preparedness. You need to stop peeking angles without being fully ready to take a fight. This is much easier said than done, because there won't be an opponent behind the majority of angles that you peek in Valorant. That's why it's easy to start slacking with your crosshair placement and being somewhat surprised by an opponent suddenly appearing behind the 10th angle that you peeked that round. My tip to fix that is to take your time before peeking. Instead of drifting into autopilot and going through angle after angle, just take a brief moment before you peek each angle to make sure that you're prepared to go into battle and that your crosshair placement is on point. You can see pro players whose aiming styles heavily depend on crosshair placement doing that as well. Here we have a gameplay scene from 100 Thieves Cryo, and you can see how there is a brief pause between every new angle he peeks. It's no wonder why he so often seems more ready for the fight than his opponents. This is the level of focus and precision that you should work towards as well. You can relax during downtimes, such as the buy phase, but when the barriers go down and you're working your way into enemy territory, you need to be sharp on every single angle that you're opening. This next tip is a very interesting topic that I call the SVS Dynamic. The term stands for strafing versus shooting, and it refers to how big of an impact it makes when you stop your strafe to start shooting. To better illustrate the concept, I made this graphic right here that shows the movement interaction between the opponent and yourself in a fight. Let's suppose first that both you and your opponent peek into each other. That means you are both moving and therefore both aim at a moving target. If now both of you counter-strafe and stop in the exact same moment, the aiming task is equal for both players, because both players aim at a stationary target when they stop. It's a fair duel in that sense. But what now happens if you strafe for just a little bit longer than your opponent? Now your opponent comes to a stop first, while still aiming at a moving target because you are mid-strafe. You, on the other hand, aim at a stationary target once you counter-strafe, because the opponent most likely is already crouch spraying at that point. This makes it so that you have an easy aiming task while the opponent has a hard one, giving you the advantage. Of course, there is a small chance that your opponent is hitting a very good shot at you before you come to a stop to shoot back. But in the majority of cases, you will gain a significant advantage. This is especially useful when you're not 100% ready for the fight and the opponent surprises you with your crosshair placement being off. You can see an example here when the enemy Reyna suddenly peeks into us in mid. Instead of stopping right away to try and hero flick onto her, we do a very long and decisive strafe to the left, and because of that, when Reyna stops to start shooting, we are a very fast moving and hard to hit target on her screen. And due to that, she misses as all her bullets fly past to our right, while we have an easy static aiming task on the other hand and take her out cleanly. Here we can see the opposite perspective, as the enemy jet peeks us from belt. We come to a stop earlier than her and miss our aiming adjustment as she is still moving left. After our initial burst, she kills us right away because we're essentially a sitting duck. If this sort of gunfight looks familiar to you, then you now made a big step towards understanding why they happen. This type of Ferrari peak that provides the SVS advantage is exactly what those jets and Reynas come at you with. You have a very hard time hitting them because they are still moving when you shoot, and then they instantly headshot you. My practical tip to implement the SVS concept into your game is to start strafing a little bit longer than you normally would, especially when you know that you're peeking into a duel. Do it with confidence and take your time to look at the opponent's movement. This will also force you to stop rushing your shots because you have more time to look at the enemy and analyze their position and movement, and so your aiming adjustments are going to be more accurate. If you apply this concept correctly, it will suddenly feel like you're playing an entirely different and much easier game. Tip number 3 goes hand in hand with what we just discussed. You want to make yourself a harder target to hit in every fighting situation. Therefore, you need to be less predictable with your movement. This means mixing up your peaks and mixing up your movement once you're in a fight. Of course, the most important thing is to never be a stationary target for too long. Crouch sprays will be punished time and time again if you miss your shots. So instead, always work in little strafes in between your shots. This goes for every type of situation: peeking, holding angles, and fighting multiple enemies at once or in quick succession. Let's get a little more concrete on peeking first. When it comes to peeking, confidence is key. Confidence is key in Valorant in general, but especially for peeks. If you know that you're engaging in a duel, always open up the angle with a dynamic and decisive step. This works especially well after you jiggled an angle to gain info or bait the opponent. You're pulling his crosshair towards the wall to then wide swing right after with the momentum on your side. Most likely, you're also getting him to shoot first, which is great because it gives you the SVS advantage. Now, after peeking, when it comes to movement in a prolonged fight, then something very advanced you can try to implement is breaking the typical counter-strafe pattern of left, right, and so on. Of course, it's good to move all the time, and strafing from side to side is the easiest way to accomplish that, but it also makes predicting the next movement easier. You can totally throw opponents off by alternating the length and direction of your strafes. You need to be very confident and comfortable though to pull this off in real fights, but deathmatches are a good place to start practicing breaking your patterns up a bit. What all these tips have in common is that you need the proper mindset to implement them in a competitive environment such as ranked. That's why I recommend you to watch the third part of our aiming guide next, where we dive into detail on how to transfer your skill into competitive matches. The video is linked right here. I'll talk to you all in the next video. See you then. Much love. Peace.